Hey there, welcome to this week's episode of Next Level Play Therapy. So, I've been in the process of getting ready for an upcoming in person Santre training. And whenever I do that, I always like to make sure when I'm creating the training to go back and look to see what the research says and what the literature is saying. And so this is a Santre training I've done before, but I wanted to expand it and update it. And as I was doing some of my research to prepare for the training, I came across this really great article in the Journal of Sand Play Therapy. And the article is by an author called Marian Anderson. So I put the citation for the article in the Journal of Sand Play Therapy. I put that in the description. So if you're interested in reading that article and you want to look more into it, then you have the citation for the article. So the Santre training that I'm going to be doing in November 2nd and 3rd in 2025 in Southern Utah, and I'll talk more about that at the end if you're interested. I thought it would be an interesting episode, a topic for this week's episode, because it does get into some of that brain body aspects of expressive arts and play therapy in particular, the and how we use Santre in the play therapy process. So that's what I wanted to talk about today, is a little bit of that somatosensory aspect of using the Santre in play therapy. So that's a really big word. And so whenever I run across these big fancy words, I always pull out my dictionary and do a little research on the word as well. And so I wanted to break that down a little bit and then kind of tie it all together into how this all applies when you're using Santre therapy with your clients in the play therapy process. And I would say this includes even adults when we're talking about using Santre therapy with adults as well. I've used Santre therapy with adults all the time. One of the things that I also thought was important about this topic is, to me, this is one of the reasons that I am um, really committed, I would say, kind of really passionate about doing in-person Santre training. So the nice thing about training now is we can do a lot online, which I think is awesome. I think if you're trying to learn Santre and you need to get some fundamentals, it's also a good idea. I think it's fine to do online Santre trainings. I've done online Santre trainings. I'm a firm believer, though, to get the best experience learning how to use Santre, doing some in-person Santre trainings is important. That's how I got all my Santre trainings. And it was really powerful to be able to do those experiential activities in the sand and really learn how powerful Santre therapy can be. And I always like to know why. Like if somebody tells me something, I think to myself, is that really true? If I'm not really familiar with the topic. I mean, I'm kind of open to listening because I like to learn new things. But then I always think to myself, just because you're saying it, does that make it true? Which I have to say kind of drives my husband a little bit crazy because I'm usually questioning things, which he on occasion finds annoying. I don't know why. Anyways, um, so I thought about this whole idea of like, why is it? Like we talk about it all the time. We talk about neuroscience and the brain body connection and Santre. It's so powerful. And I think to myself, well, why is that? So to me, it also kind of hits that target as well to explore what is this sensory aspect of Santre therapy. Because here's the thing, if you've been working with kids, and let's say you've been doing sand tray therapy, you have a sand tray in your office, you have miniatures, all of those things, and let's say you're working with young kids, how many of you, post in the comments, how many of you in the play therapy process have had a small child look at your sand tray and ask you, hey, can I get in the sand tray? Or they don't even bother asking. It's a sandbox, right? If you're a little kid, what do? You get in the sandbox, right? Well, it's a little bit different in the playroom. It's not exactly the same, but and how many of you, when you look at the sand tray and you think and you're get your hands in the sand tray and you think to yourself, brings back memories of going to the beach. If you've been to the beach, running your hands through the sand, making sand castles, dripping the sand on top of the sand castle, or just that kind of feeling and experience and what it does to your body to get your hands in the sand. I don't know about you, but when my kids were really little, we had a sandbox in the backyard, and they would always get in there and build things, moving their hands through the sand. And there's something about that movement of your hands through the sand that accesses memories, right? Accesses even implicit memories. And that's what we're talking about here when we're talking about using the sand, a sandbox, and miniatures in the play therapy process for a therapeutic purpose. So that's what we're going to talk about today. If you're watching live on the live stream, I would love to know who's here. Post your name in the comments. Where are you from? What population are you working with? Also, are you using sand tray? What have your experiences with the sand tray making process been in the play therapy process? So post those in the comments. If you're watching on the live stream replay, please feel free to also go ahead, post your comments. I love reading those, connecting with people in the comments. So feel free to do that. If you're listening on the podcast episode, also please feel free to comment. And if you have found this information helpful, please feel free to like it, and you may want to hit that notification bell so that you're notified when I'm going live again. Keep up with the discussions, and maybe if you're not available at the live stream, you can always watch the replays. And then also feel free to share it with your colleagues who you think would find it useful. So let's get started for today. I am going to read a couple of quotes just because I thought, oh, these were so good. I have to read these. So what we're talking about today is examining the sensory aspects of sand tray therapy for healing in the play therapy process. And this really, when we're talking about the neuroscience aspects of sand tray and play therapy and healing, and this article in particular that I read that is called Hands in the Sand, Explorations, Musings, Reflections. And this is by Marian Anderson in the Journal of Sand Play Therapy. The citation is in the description, so if you want to go look that up, you will know where to go looking. So when we're talking about the mind-body aspects, and we're talking about that experience of having your hands in the sand, moving sand tray, miniatures around, moving the sand around, getting just that sensory aspect of your hands and the sand, one of the things that we are talking about is access to the somatosensory processing parts of your brain and how that connects with your body. And so I thought I would read a couple of definitions about what is if you've never heard this term, what is the somatosensory processing? What is somatosensory processing? And so, according to the Oxford Online Dictionary, somatosensory processing is relating to or denoting a sensation, such as pressure, pain, or warmth, which can occur anywhere in the body, in contrast to one localized area at a sense organ, such as sight, balance, and taste. So we're talking about that mind-body connection, how the mind and the body are connected and experiencing and processing and making sense of what is going on a sensory level. There was another even more expanded definition that I thought was good, and this is according to Medscape Online, and it's according to Medscape, the somatosensory system is part of the sensory system concerned with the conscious perception of touch, pressure, pain, temperature, position, movement, and vibration, which arise from the muscles, joints, skin, and fascia. The somatosensory system is a 3-neuron system that relays sensations detected in the periphery and conveys them via pathways through the spinal cord, brainstem, and the thalamic relay nuclei. My mouth's not working. Nuclei to the sensory cortex and the parietal lobe. So there's that mind-body connection of that sensory aspect of your hands in the sand, molding, building, moving, creating, and how that accesses different parts of your processing system. So what does that have to do with Santre therapy? So that was what is somatosensory processing. Just read a couple of definitions there. So sensory activation of those neural processes in the sand, and how does that relate to Santre therapy and healing? And so here's the thing. One of the things that I think is really important for us to understand, and if you've done any trainings or reading or research this on your own, you know that we have these things called implicit memory, right? This is memory that's stored in our body and our brain that we don't have conscious access to. So the way that these memories are stored, because they don't have language attached, they're stored through sensory information, including emotions, also our perceptions of that experience, what something smelled like, what it tasted like, what you saw, what you heard. All of these experiences get stored away in these implicit memories through these sensory aspects of the memory. And so activating those experiences is part of what happens in the Santre making process when you're talking about using Santre therapy for healing. So one of the things that we know through the work of Alan Shore, with that understanding of early right brain and attachment experiences and how right brain processing influences our early attachment experiences. We also learned from the work of Peter Fonagy and his colleagues this whole idea of mentalization, which is first experienced in these early, from birth, we are actually, we know from research now, even in utero, babies begin having experiences and begin storing them away from their earliest moments of birth all of those experiences that they have with their early caregivers and those caregiving experiences, all of those are stored away through our sensory aspects of our, through sensory aspects. And then we make meaning of them, especially over time. And so, what we know from attachment and from this concept of mentalization, that there are tons of experiences that we've had early on that influence our beliefs about ourselves, our beliefs about others, and our beliefs about relationships and how those work, and what different um, facial expressions may mean to one person might mean something different to another person, based on those early experiences that get stored away via implicit memory. And so, one of the things that I thought was really interesting about this concept of somatosensory processing, and this article by Marian Anderson in the Journal of Sand Play Therapy, is this idea of how our hands in the sand will access memories, maybe conscious memories, because I just explained some that are conscious to me, right? But I don't even, I look back and I don't even remember those until my hands get in the sand and I access those. And then I consciously kind of bring those to the forefront of my mind memory. And then I'll get all of my feelings and emotions and what that felt like in my body, and my perceptions of that. Think about those. I can't. So here's the thing. I can't tell you how many times I've even worked with adults, and especially with adults who've experienced early attachment wounds and early trauma. And we can get into the sand, and they can process those through the sand without necessarily needing to consciously articulate to me what's going on. And that's play therapy. Play therapy allows children, and I would say even adolescents, to access those therapeutic powers of play to facilitate healing. And this includes the ability to use the sand, the sandbox, and the miniatures for those sensory processing, sensory motor processing avenues to work through and make sense of experiences in their lives that they don't necessarily have the ability to consciously articulate. And so, to me, that's one of the things that's really useful and magical, I would say, about using sand tray therapy in the play therapy process. The thing is, you want to make sure that you have good training too, because I remember trying to use, this was way back, several decades ago, when training was not nearly as prevalent as it is now. It was really hard to find training. And so I remember what it was like to kind of muddle my way through trying to learn how to use a framework for play therapy and a framework for the sand tray, so that it felt like I was actually helping my clients and not just fumbling and bumbling my way through and feeding my imposter syndrome, for sure. I would say getting training, I was much more effective once I got the training. So to me, that's why I'm really passionate about doing training, in particular for sand tray training, really passionate about providing opportunities for in-person training where you can kind of get your hands in the sand and process that, so you understand how it works and how powerful it is. So the other thing is that I think is important to think about is activating those implicit memories. And I was reading through in preparation for this this training that I'm doing the first week in November, I went back to the interpersonal neurobiology resources that I have, and one of them is an oldie but a goodie. And I have to say, this is a funny thing. So I one of the books that I love is The Brainwise Therapist by Bonnie Badenoch, and I hope I pronounced her name right. And also Daniel Siegel with his book Mindsight. Those are two that are well read. I read over and over. So I went back to The Brainwise Therapist because she has a chapter in there about sand play therapy, and include a lot of that stuff in the training as well. And there was a really good quote that I thought would be good to share here as well. So this is a quote from the Brainwise Therapist book by Bonnie Badenoch. And she says, "Work in the sand invites the implicit world, home of our earliest attachment wounds, to take symbolic form. Sometimes it provides a road around defenses. Often it lets pre-verbal pain emerge. Sometimes it makes concrete the feelings that person has difficulty communicating. Sometimes it externalizes and contains inner anguish that has been too powerful to call to consciousness in other ways." And I think that's true. To me, that is the magic of using sand tray therapy in play therapy. I think this is true even for children who don't necessarily have the cognitive development, that stage of development where they are when you're working with them. They don't have the ability to access those higher functioning cognitive areas of their brain to process what's going on for them. But I can't tell you how many children I've seen, even young children, use the sand tray making process to access those therapeutic powers of play and overcome whatever challenges that they were experiencing in the playroom. So I thought that was a good quote to end on. For this week's episode, let me do a quick recap. So the somatosensory processing system is basically that mind-body connection focused on accessing perceptions of touch, pressure, pain, temperature, position, movement, and vibration. All of these coming from the muscles, joints, skin, and fascia. And then the somatosensory system processes that through the brainstem into the brain and stores that away. And even I would say we at some level, we also begin to make sense of that as well, especially when we're talking about those early implicit memories that we've experienced as infants and young children. And we can use that sensory, this aspect, we can use that mind-body connection in the play therapy room using the sand tray process to help access those implicit memories that are held deep within the body and the mind of the builder through touch. As you move your hands through the sand tray, you rearrange and select and place those miniatures to create the scene in the sand that's meaningful, which is also really important for young children, or even children, I would even say adolescents, who are struggling with some things that have deeply impacted them on a social emotional level. We know children don't have access to the higher level cognitive functioning when they're really, really young. And even children who struggle with processing and making sense of things and their emotional distress tolerance level, how are they managing that? So the sand tray making process allows the opportunity to bypass some of those cognitive aspects to get to those deeper deeper memories and those deeper experiences that need to be processed and made sense of in a new way for healing in the sand tray. So that is it for today's episode. If you're interested in my 2-day in-person sand tray training for mental health professionals working with children, adolescents, and adults, I do have a 2-day in-person training coming up on Saturday and Sunday on November 2nd and 3rd, 2025. And in this training, so I do a lot of, this one's going to focus, it's called Using a Neuroscience and Attachment Lens with Sand Tray in Play Therapy. This training is really going to focus on looking at that neuroscience and attachment aspects of the therapy process, of the play therapy process. And then how do you have a framework to help your clients? So we're using that neuroscience and attachment theoretical lens as the framework that we're going to make sense of what's going on and how are we going to help our clients using this sand tray making process. So if you are wanting to know how to make sense of what your clients created in the sand tray, if you are want to learn how to recognize themes, or maybe you just want some more training on that, you want to understand how to effectively hold that sand tray making process from beginning to end through each stage of the change process, then we're going to talk about that. We are going to do a lot of experiential. So I keep these trainings really small. I have a maximum of 10 to 12 people. Usually I try to keep it no more than 10. Sometimes we go up to 12 just to accommodate more people. But the reason I like to keep it small is because we do a lot of sand tray making. We practice processing and understanding what's going on through those sand trays that have been created. So I like to keep a small, I call it kind of like a retreat-like experience where it's a place for you as a therapist to get refreshed, also learn some things as well, have that group experience of learning where you kind of not only get my experience, but you get the experience of the members in the group. For those of you who are much newer, it also provides a lot of support during that learning process. So if you're interested in the training, registration is open now. The training takes place in beautiful southern Utah, which I'm telling you in early November is really very beautiful. So if you're interested, then pop over to my website at rhplaytherapytraining.com/courses. So Renewing Hearts Play Therapy Training. On the courses page, the name of the training is Using a Neuroscience and Attachment Lens with sand tray in Play Therapy. All right. And I will see you next week. Bye for now.